This is Overheard Overnight, and I'm Christopher Mark. There's a song from 1970 by Joni Mitchell called Big Yellow Taxi, you know it. And the chorus from that goes something like this. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Now, I've always felt that chorus line summed up the change between the 1960s and the 1970s. I grew up in the 1970s in Canada, the son of Jamaican immigrants. It was a turbulent decade, not just for the world, but for us as well, because we were leaving our home and coming to a new home. And with that, of course, comes a lot of challenges. The culture shock of immigrating to Canada from the home was just the first reality after we'd spent many happy vacations here in years leading up to that. As a visitor and now as a resident, right? A little bit different. It began for us in 1967 when we traveled to Canada to visit family and friends. We also had a big trip planned to Montreal to see Expo 67. And as you recall, 1967 was a massive year in Canada. Lots of buzz going on in all the cities, especially Montreal and Toronto, around Expo 67 and the celebration of 100 years a country. So we picked an auspicious time to come to Canada for a big family visit. The drive down to Montreal is something I'm always going to remember, simply because I got to sit in the back, actually lay in the back of a completely packed station wagon for the 5-hour drive from Toronto down to Montreal. And I was laying on the luggage in the back, looking out and looking at the cars and having fun. Of course, that is in the days well before any seat belts for all passengers. We had a fabulous time in Montreal. It was just crazy times. Man in His World Expo 67 was just a huge event for us. And we spent 3 days there going on the rides. The monorail was a big hit, eating a lot of food. And especially one day comes to mind, the day it rained. And you'd think we'd be, wanting to get indoors. No, we splashed around in the puddles that day and had probably one of the best days I can recall of being with family. Montreal and Expo 67, that began our love affair, our family's love affair with Canada. We'd had family here before, of course, but that trip was super special. A few years later, things in Jamaica got a little more intense. The violence intensified, the political anxieties going on between, competing political parties caused Dad to decide he wanted to immigrate. So he and Mom picked Canada, lots of family here. And we'd been here before, and of course, we'd fallen in love. So decision was made. And as kids, we didn't really argue too much. We were looking forward to the move of coming to Canada, not thinking too much about what we were leaving behind. And that 4-hour plane ride, it really is a transportation from one world to another. I can remember coming out of the airplane in Toronto and walking down with the family. And in past trips, we'd come down and gone through the visitors aisle. This time we looked up and there's the sign that says immigrating to Canada. And that was one of those moments where you go, wow, we're taking a step and, can we ever go back, right? It was a shock that I don't think we as a family were prepared for. And certainly I wasn't. 14 years old at the time, and you're coming here, you dress differently. We spoke with heavy accents. We ate different food. And now we're expected to transition, to fit in, not to be accepted, because that just wasn't the way it was done back in those days. You had to fit into Canada, fit into the society here. And my way of doing it was to go back to some things that, I appreciated the best and was comfortable with. And one of them was rock and roll. I know what you're thinking. Jamaican kid, not liking reggae all that much. I really wasn't a big fan back then. The soundtrack to my years was, were bands like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Jefferson Airplane. And I was a big fan of heavy rock. So Led Zeppelin early albums were fantastic. And coming to Canada in 72 at that point, I picked up on the rock scene very quickly. The Guess Who, of course, was a well-established band. But there was this other little band called Rush. And at the time, they were small. They were tiny. Saw them for the first time in a very small venue in Brampton. There were 90 people in the audience, and these three guys come on stage and rip the place up. And I thought, wow, that's going to be good for me because it's rock and roll, and I'm going to have a good time listening and adding to my collection. But at the back of all of this, even as we're starting to get used to living in Canada, um, little thing is tugging at the back of your head about you've left your homeland, you're in this new country, you're making new friends, you're making a new world for yourself. But in the back of my mind, and still is probably to this day, was that line from Joni Mitchell's song in the chorus: "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone." Until next time.